So for people, it's kind of obvious, but I'm not Anais. Originally, this topic was going to be talked by Anais, or this slot. She couldn't unfortunately make it, so I've stepped in to expand my lightning talk that was going to be presented later on. But I'm going to talk over the next 30 minutes about the missing middle of platforms. That's my pitch for today. I always like to start my talks with kind of high-level TLDRs. And during my 20 or so year career in IT, I've seen three broad ways to build a platform. The first is kind of top-down, app dev-focused approach, popularized very much at the moment with portals. Everyone are loving portals, right? Backstage, I'm not going to be too mean about Backstage, but like Backstage is like everywhere. It's got the zeitgeist, right? Fantastic to get started, can be more of a challenge on the data experience. I've built a whole bunch of platforms bottom up, Terraform, Mesos back in the day, Kubernetes, Crossplane, all these different things as well, more infrastructure focused. And I was super pleased when I put all my Terraform together, but when I gave it to the developers, I realized that some of them didn't want to learn the concepts they had to. The abstractions leaked up through the platform. And suddenly it's like, we joke in Syntasso, we say it's like giving someone a puppy for Christmas. You get Terraform on day one, much like the puppy, ooh, look at that. And then you've got to look after it. You've got to clean up after it. You've got to feed it, right? So it's like, it can be challenging when you've got this infrastructure focus. I think we as a group now, and you're definitely in the vanguard by coming to this conference, we're looking at building middle out, platform engineering focused. We've kind of moved away perhaps from the whole DevOps, you build it, you run it, to platform engineering, kind of a bunch of things like everything as a service, process automation, managing things at scale, and something really, really important is platform as a product. You are offering your platform as a product to your internal customers. And the real magic happens there, and that when you treat it like a product, you actually are building for user needs. You're really understanding what folks are wanting and meeting that need. So I like to put this meme up. I've seen this a whole bunch in my platform sort of experience building. Like, you aren't doing it wrong if no one knows what you're doing. If you're just building a platform, well, you can't go wrong, right? But if you're building a platform to increase speed, reduce defects, scale out, then you've got a much more clear idea of what you're actually building for. Very quickly, this is me at Daniel Bryant UK on most of the interwebs. Not so much X these days, more LinkedIn, but GitHub, other places you can find me as well. I love to learn, I love to teach. I've written a couple of books with friends over the years. I write for InfoQ, so a lot of the news you see there, I help out with the news. I've worked on a whole bunch of open source projects, including OpenJDK. I was a big Java fan back in the day. And I've worked on API gateways like Emissary, Envoy, and that kind of tech as well. And then Telepresence and now Kratix in the platform building space. So I love to get involved with the open source communities. Love to contribute and learn as much as I can from folks. So this talk began actually from another talk back 2 or so years ago now at Valencia in KubeCon, and also at PlatformCon I did a version of it too. And I talked about from Kubernetes to PaaS to what's next. Like I mentioned, I built a bunch of platforms on Mesos, some on Kubernetes. I'd used Cloud Foundry, I'd used Heroku, and I did Rails. And I talked a lot about golden paths, making it easy to do the right thing, but also allowing folks to kind of go off-road as well. This was a very popular graphic I put up on the stage, talked about my cognitive load during, you can see my kind of dev career down the side, like 2000s when I left university all the way to 2020. You can see as I changed different technologies from Java back to Ruby on Rails, my kind of cognitive load, my overhead to understand what I was doing, definitely peaked when I went onto SOA in the Java world, and it definitely peaked when I started playing around with microservices. Heroku days, it was literally Heroku push. Super simple. Set up some routes, happy days, right? Same with Cloud Foundry. But then when I had to learn a whole bunch of other stuff, in addition to Java and Go, I had to understand Jenkins, I had to understand Docker, Kubernetes. My kind of cognitive load went through the roof. At the time, I was working for Ambassador Labs, and we were talking a lot about how the CNCF was a kind of foundation for what we were calling a developer control plane. And if we dive into this slide a little bit more, you can actually start to see some of the things I'm talking about today with my missing middle. So we were saying everyone needs to code, to ship, and to run as a developer, right? And there's a bunch of CNCF tech that help you do that. Backstage was very much becoming a thing. as was Clutch and a few other portals. And I wasn't quite sure what to call this middle bit here. But I knew you wanted to leverage webhooks, like CRDs, the Kubernetes API is awesome, right? I knew the Kubernetes API was going to play a part of this. But there was how do you do the workflows? How do you connect the portals with the tech to code, to ship, and to run? So this is my thinking a couple of years ago, right? Let's wind it back a little bit now and look at just a level set, because I appreciate this is a KCD, it's not a platform con, right? What is a platform? I really like Evan Bottcher's definition from ThoughtWorks. Talks a lot about self-service APIs, tools, services, knowledge, and support. Knowledge and support, not just techie stuff, right? And it's arranged around this internal product to help folks work at a higher pace with reduced coordination. I really like that definition. The Gartner folks have arrived. You know it's got serious when Gartner's arrived, right? We say that no one gets fired for using Gartner stuff these days, much like the old IBM, right? But full credit to the Gartner folks, they really identified what this platform engineering thing is. And they dialed into developer experience and productivity, self-service capabilities, and automated infrastructure operations. And not too much of a spoiler alert, but if you look here, you can kind of see 3 layers in the platform model they've got there. I'll talk about that missing middle, right? Setting expectations. Gartner are also talking how platform engineering is about to go over the peak of inflated expectations into the trough of disillusionment. And I've got the graphic that kind of captures that. You'll notice it's ChatGPT generated. These people have got one leg. Once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? It's kind of weird. But this kind of captures how I think we are about to learn a whole bunch of stuff. Because when we hit the trough of disillusionment, you do start to hear the horror stories and the battle stories. I've been through it with DevOps. I've been through it with microservices. We learn a lot when we go down through here. But it's rough. If you're building platforms, it's going to be a bit rough, right? Mark O'Neill, he's actually been promoted recently at Gartner, has talked a lot about this. The only way we're going to go at the moment is kind of down. But he's saying the same thing I've just said. There's a lot of sort of negative stories going to be coming out. There's a lot of learning opportunities. And a quick look on Reddit kind of proves this out, right? There's a great Reddit post. We've spent months building this platform. Devs hate it. Help me understand why. I can relate to that, right? Am I a bad platform engineer, or am I just a bad platform engineer at this company? These kind of stories, right? People have built stuff without talking to their customers, without understanding what they need, and now they're getting that sort of pushback. So I'm hoping this is a good cue for that missing middle and that platform as a product mindset. I've actually got a quote of Paula. Paula's my boss. It just happens, is here as well. With Mark commenting on your, I think it was KubeCon, Paula, you did a analyst briefing, right? And there's very much a danger of sort of the build it and they will come mentality. Do talk to your customers. You often have to build enough to sort of have proof of value, proof of concept, but don't just build it without talking to folks. The why of platforms. So current software engineering challenges. You want to overcome these 3 things. Often developers are blocked, waiting on tickets, waiting on other teams. You want to mitigate risk, particularly in a regulated environment, but just pretty much everywhere as well. And once you've got that sort of, addressing the slow and the risk issues, it's the inefficiency that often gets you. The tech sprawl, multiple platforms, these things. A bunch of stats to back it up. I love the DORA work, accelerated state of DevOps. 50% of respondents are capable of deploying less than between once a week and once a month. What an interesting stat, right? The Harness State of DevX report is a really good report, and it's saying 42% of developers say they can't release code to production without risking failures. Kind of scary in some ways, right? And then an older report talks about how a whole bunch of time is basically being spent on just maintenance when it comes to infrastructure and ops. And this kind of really helped me solidify the current challenges we've got, right? Definitely pick your poison, understand sort of theory of constraints where you're struggling the most in your organization, but it's usually one of those 3 things. So flipping it around, what are the goals of your platform? You want to go faster. I think offering everything as a service, and that everything depends on the abstraction level in your org. It can be database as a service, or it can be a service specific to your org. If you work in finance, maybe you have a know your customer service, right? You have a fraud detection service, a special cache service. There's all different levels of abstraction there. You want to decrease risk. You want to be able to automate those manual processes. This is a really key thing. There's a lot of sign off and security checking. You want to automate that. So do it once, learn together, codify it in some way. And once you've got that speed and you've got that safety, you want to be able to do it at scale across your entire fleets, right? Now, I'm going to talk more about the tech over the next 20 minutes or so, but I did want to give a massive shout out. So Team Topologies, fantastic book. Fast Flow Conf was actually in this venue a month or so ago now. Matthew and Manuel were here. Amazing stuff they've talked about. Like, we are working within socio-technical systems, people, technology. Check out this book. And I've got to give a shameless plug to Sarah. So Sarah's our keynote tomorrow, and she's also doing a panel in the afternoon. Like, these are my go-to books for understanding organizational dynamics with platforms. There's many other ones. I've done a blog post recently on the Fantastic blog about other books I recommend. But those are the two. Like, we're not going to cover the people stuff today, but they are really valuable things. Let's look a little bit at the how of platforms. So I mentioned this sort of top-down app dev focused rollout. I'm picking on Backstage because I hear a lot of Backstage stuff, right? But Spotify do an amazing job. But there's definitely this puppy for Christmas vibe. Developers go here, they get their template, they spin things up and deploy it and view the metrics. Now, I think straight up Backstage is an amazing service catalog. The tech docs, fantastic, right? It is a fantastic developer experience if you've got nothing before. You know, you've got microservices, you've got things everywhere. You just don't understand what you've got in your estate. Backstage and other portals are highly customizable. One of the slight anti-patterns we perhaps do see is everyone saying, I can write a plugin for that, and then they realize it's TypeScript, and then they're not so keen. But like, you can customize these things, right? The challenge is that the portal is often a facade, a thin facade, over a series of infrastructure APIs. Great for bootstrapping. How do you do upgrades? How do you do maintenance? A bit more of a challenge. And this day two aspects of the portal itself, like there is companies like Roadie that actually offer Backstage as a service because it is quite hard to run yourself. We bump into Backstage teams in organizations, right? Much like I did with Istio teams back in the day. And I'm always like, when a team is formed around the technology, I get suspicious. You know what I mean? You're not the engineering enablement team or the platform as a product team. You're the Backstage team or the Istio team. I'm like, oh, like it's the only one thing you're going to be building because your team's called that, right? This is sort of a bit of a summary of that top-down app dev focus rollout. Now, the bottom-up one is more around, I love Terraform. Like, I'm a big HashiCorp fan. Like, this is kind of where I sort of cut my teeth. At Terraform or Crossplane, pick your poison, is my platform. I can orchestrate all of my infrastructure by HashiCorp config language, cron jobs, GitOps pipelines. This is good stuff. Everything is code. Love that, because I was sort of racking and stacking back in the day. Like when we moved to infrastructure as code, I did a whole bunch of Puppet and Chef, and I really liked that. That was really nice. It's highly automatable, which is great for that going fast experience again, right? But I did find that infrastructure abstractions leak outwards. Suddenly developers having to understand more about CRDs, more about Kubernetes, all these things. And not every engineer wants to do that. They just want to give, here's my application, make it run, kind of thing, right? And I do find at scale, the diversity of tech can be challenging to automate. I think sort of my colleague Kat hinted at this, and I've seen other talks hint at this, where you get these kind of like islands of amazing good platform stuff and all the other old stuff that you're never going to move across. And then you get that two sort of tier system, two-speed organization. So I'm not saying like platform orchestration is a panacea, but like this bottom-up infrastructure-focused approach can often lead to kind of different tiers of like platforms within your organization. So this comes on to my pitch for the missing middle, right? And back from my academic days, I always liked looking around at the industry and learning from smart folks. And I saw a bunch of very interesting people talking about this kind of middle layer within the platforms. The first was Crossplane, Upbound folks. And they, I'm sure many of you bumped into Crossplane, but they were talking about like this composite resource, being able to orchestrate, compose various things together into higher level abstractions. Crossplane, fantastic tool for managing infrastructure as code. Developer can put their claims in, but they're putting these composite resources where you can put arbitrary code in to do workflow management and all these other kind of things. The Canoe folks, I think it's coming out of AWS, Amazon. It's well worth a look if you haven't bumped into Canoe. Cloud Native Operational Excellence, I think it stands for. And they were kind of having this middle layer again, this orchestration layer for infrastructure as code, CI/CD, workflow orchestration, that kind of good stuff. And Humanitech with their reference architecture. I think McKinsey sort of bootstrapped a lot of this, but they have like explicitly a platform orchestrator part in their diagram. And like the Humanitech platform orchestrator is there, Kratix is there, and Fusion Stack. And then I'm working on Kratix at the moment, open source projects. This is literally baked in the middle layer. You can kind of see the portal layers there. You can see the platform orchestration layer, and then you can see the infrastructure layer. So I'm looking around at the industry, and I'm seeing a bunch of smart folks saying, hey, there's kind of 3 levels of my platform, 3 tiers, if you like. And particularly for an old Java developer like myself, 3-tier systems make me happy, right? I built many Java systems in 3 tiers. And this is a bit of an eye chart slide, but you can read the blog or take this away for later on, but I just want to crystallize what I mean by these 3 tiers. I think this is what I'm calling an application choreography layer. This is where you're coding, shipping, running. UI, CLI, declarative config for Kubernetes, whatever works. You're focusing on the software development lifecycle at this stage. I think we can all agree pretty much on the infrastructure, orchestration or composition layer. This is where you're sort of like planning, building, maintaining. This is the realm of the platform engineer, the DevOps person, the operator, sysadmin. This is your Terraforms, your Crossplanes, and Ansible and Bash and good stuff. And what I'm sort of trying to say today is I think this is the missing middle, this platform orchestration layer. And this is where you're focusing on the platform API and the platform lifecycle, which is a bit different than the infrastructure API and lifecycle, a bit different than the software API and lifecycle. And the reason I'm sort of pitching this, and I've chatted to Keith Morris, who's got a fantastic book on O'Reilly, he's sort of coming to the same conclusions as well. And once you understand the 3 layers, you can think about the domain boundaries, you can think about the APIs, and you can think about coupling and cohesion. And this is the way we build scalable platforms for that speed, that safety, and that efficiency. And this is I find mental models, as an ex-consultant, I find these mental models very useful for understanding the world, right, and making choices, and making trade-offs as well as a technical leader. So going back to that, what is platform engineering? I mentioned if you squint, you can almost see the 3 tiers, right, the 3 layers. And I think this is pretty much it. Like, there's this application choreography layer in the Gartner model. There's this platform orchestration layer, and there's this infrastructure composition layer. I like Gartner, again, calling out, it's not just tech, it's knowledge and things like that as well. But I like this model of like the 3 tiers. So making it happen. Abstract thinking. So as a fantastic webinar, I got to meet Sevi Kim, and Sevi's like a product engineer on Backstage. So my colleague Abby and I jumped on with Sevi. He very kindly did a webinar with us. We ran through a bunch of things, and he really schooled me on thinking about UX when it comes to platforms. And things like APIs, domain boundaries, Solid and Cupid, they're good kind of design principles, right? Like single responsibility principle, open and closed, and Cupid is like composable, Unix philosophy. I forget some of the other acronyms, but these are things I learned when I was an engineer coding. I lived by these things. And he was pitching that these are just as important for platforms. Thinking about your abstractions, thinking about your APIs. He talked a lot about information hiding between the 3 layers, making sure like each layer is crystal clear on what it does and does no more. Something for the UI in particular, or the kind of UX, I guess, he talked a lot about progressive disclosure. And funny, if I was on a panel with Shmurti Patel, and Shmurti works at, Stripe, I think it's Apollo now, but she's super smart. She's done a bunch of amazing platforms, and she also mentioned progressive disclosure. In the same week, I chatted to Sevi, went on this panel, and Shmurti was like, hey, have you heard about progressive disclosure? And I was like, no, this is kind of interesting. If you haven't, it's well worth a look. Progressive disclosure, we all see it day in, day out. It's making systems easy to get started, but making the hard stuff possible. And I remember the good example I had, I remember when I was an engineer, working on an engineering team, and being given a values YAML file. And the engineer said, we've made it super simple for you to deploy, like your app on Kubernetes. All you need to do is fill out this values.yaml file, and then magic, stuff happens in the background. And I was like, oh, cool. I opened up the values YAML file, and it was 500 lines long. Right? I was like, wow. I'm sure I only need to tweak a few properties there, but the sheer, I was like, 500 lines of YAML, what? Or 500 lines of config, it was kind of scary. And with progressive disclosure, what you'd only give the 3 lines, right? But you make it possible, potentially, to do that 500-line config, but you don't scare people up front. You kind of progressively disclose as people become more experts with the platform or need to do more things. And as simple as this sounds, it can be a real game changer for getting adoption of your platform. If you scare folks off with that 500-line values file, it's hard, as Kat said earlier on, it's hard to get folks back on board. I sort of might rant against portals a little bit. Like there's a lot of value in portals, but I do recommend designing your platform for UI, CLI, and API. Like I was a Java developer, so I lived on the CLI. When I went to work with some Windows folks, they were like, they wouldn't use a tool without a UI. And I was a bit like, what? For a while. And then I realized you've got to meet folks where they're at. Do you know what I mean? As in like, yeah, I was a Java developer. They were Windows developers. Until PowerShell came along, like they were like, I want my UI kind of thing. So I do think designing your platform for all the things is really important there. Optimize for the automation. Like the API gives you so much power for that kind of thing. Oops. Yeah, these are principles. I'm going to hat tip savvy. These are things I really got me thinking about designing sort of the correct abstractions within platforms. Business requirements change, user expectations expand, and APIs are the core of the platform. So I want to introduce a few APIs now. First is Open Application Model. As a cross-plane was very tied into this early on. Well worth a look at that. Humanitech have donated Score to the CNCF now as well. So if you're looking at sort of abstractions and APIs for workload management, these tools are well worth checking out. Going a bit further down, there's Kratix, which I'm working on. There's Promises. You go into Kube Builder. You're building Kubernetes controllers, pretty much. And then you go into things like cross-plane, and then we've got Mash Driver, Terraform, other tools. None of these are bad or good. It's all about trade-offs, right? Like the Open Application Model and Score are more dev-focused, more user-focused. When you go down into like Mash Driver and so forth, it's more implementation-focused. Recognize the trade-offs you're going to be making there, right? In regard to the tech, we're seeing stacks emerge. And folks have bumped into the back stack, like cunningly named, Backstage, Argo, Crossplane, and Kyverno. So Kyverno is a policy management, OPA, things like that. This is seeing some traction. I've mentioned Canoe already, right? The cloud-native operational excellence framework. There's Kube First. There's DIY, all the other CNCF tech. Pick your levels of abstraction. The top is definitely more opinionated. You're going to be using Backstage for your portal, Argo for your CI/CD, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas here, you can do anything you want. Pick all the CNCF tech, all right? The challenge, obviously, when you pick all the sort of best of breed, is how do you assemble it to get that platform you want? It's mandatory that I put up this graphic at this point, right? The CNCF landscape is confusing, but there's some real gems in there. You got to go hunting. I'm going to show a quick example with Kratix now, just to make some of this clearer. Again, this is an open source project. Other projects in this space exist, like Fusion Stack and so forth. These are more just principles. But with something like Kratix, you literally have your API, your application layer, you've got your platform orchestration layer, your infrastructure layer, sort of clear boundaries between the three things. And just in more detail here, like the APIs are literally Kubernetes CRDs, as they are with many platform orchestrators. And then you can control your workflows down here. Like we use Docker containers to basically like put the workflows together. So anything that can go in a container can run the workflow, some auditing, some CI/CD, a whole bunch of other things as well. But this is the way you control your lifecycle. The API defines how you interact with the platform components, how you interact with the services, and the workflows are the lifecycle of your platform components. We call our platform APIs promises, and you can see the Kubernetes CRD spec here. And basically, you have your API, your dependencies, and then workflows, destination rules. So think like taints and tolerations kind of vibe from Kubernetes. But this can be recursive. You can have compound promises, right? I think I've actually got a graphic there. So you can put, say, like you've got a bucket promise, a deployment promise, a cache promise, and then you get your app as a service promise. And the beauty is you can manage the individual promises at scale. So say you want to like roll out a fix to like the Java service promises, you can not only fix the individual promises, but you can roll out across all of the promises, all of the services. That's what the orchestration gives you. It gives you that lifecycle management over time. It's not a one-shot deal. It's something you like help you look after your platform over time. I think I've got my arrows there, sorry. And something that's like, it sort of warms my heart as a Java developer. We have like aspects. I don't know if anyone that's a Java developer did like aspect-oriented programming, but basically it's a way to reuse parts of your platform. So for example, someone can collaborate, like a security team can collaborate with the platform team, come up with a security aspect, might do some auditing, might do some security checks. And once that's written once, it can be inner sourced or contributed to the platform team. They can look after it, and other folks can reuse these aspects. So you're sort of like, it takes, perhaps a bit of time to get started with some of the aspects, but over time you get more and more of these platform components you can reuse, you can manage them easier, you can upgrade them easier. This is kind of the magic of like being able to build a composable platform of Lego bricks, if you like, that you can reuse. Right, I'm going to skip ahead, I think, just in terms of time. Let me just do, I think it was that one. Go back to what are your goals of your platform. So you want to go faster, right? You want to decrease risk, and you want to increase efficiency. These are the key things. Having a product focus is really, really valuable. This is a fantastic blog here from the ThoughtWorks folks that talks a lot about the application sort of layer I've talked about. It talks a whole lot about the infrastructure composition layer as well, and it talks a lot about team topologies. This is an amazing blog to read if you want to understand how to build platforms as products. Do check, there's a bit of confusion in the parlance, like there's a developer-focused platform, which I'm talking about today, and there's like a low-code, no-code version of platforms. Do recognize what you're actually building, understand, communicate, collaborate with your teams as to what the purpose of the platform is. Quick shout out to what gets measured gets managed. So establishing goals and measurements is really key. There's a bunch of resources I put there, like there's an eMag out in InfoQ. I did some podcasts with Sarah and Paula recently. But we talked a lot about leading indicators, so adoption rates of your platform, onboarding times, time to nth pull request. These are all good leading indicators of is my platform, is the product being successful. Lagging indicators, more about app retention rate. Do folks who've deployed something on your platform come back? Do they use for sale or something else, some shadow IT? Think about like incidents or near misses mitigated, and you often have to adjust the return on investment. So if you've kind of like saved some incidences, saved some incidents, or you've enabled folks to go faster, you want to capture that and feed that back to your leadership team to really, like capture the value of the platform. So wrapping up. Build your platform intentionally. I said that meme earlier on, right? We see a lot of platform teams being spun up just building a platform, but why are you building that platform? Is it to go faster? Is it to be safer? Is it to scale out efficiently? Understand the goals of your platform and measure accordingly. Watch out for this missing middle, and I think platform orchestrators, like I mentioned, they're very interesting. It's like Kratix, Fusion Stack, Humanitech, these kind of things. There is this like product, open source product emerging in this space around platform orchestration. If you're struggling with scaling the day two ops, like you've got the templates rocking, but you're having troubles upgrading, or you've got security incidents that you can't quite fix easy, I think this could be a good cue for that missing middle. If you find your developers complaining about learning Terraform, cross-plane, too many abstractions, this is often a good cue for this missing middle again. And finally, focusing on platform as a product. Well worth a Google, well worth a read around these things. When you treat your platform like an internal product, magic happens. At that point, thank you very much.